This deep dive, we're tackling a really, really tough situation. And, I just want to acknowledge how serious this is right off the bat. This listener is dealing with unwanted messages, and it's coming from her 30-year-old cousin, and she's only 16. He knows that she's a lesbian, and there's this whole history of mental health issues in the family. And we don't know for sure, but medication might even be a factor here. So, yeah, it's completely understandable that she's scared. We're going to look at the advice that people online gave, but we're also going to go deeper, exploring those complexities of the situation.
Yeah, and she got a lot of advice to tell trusted adults, parents, other family members, even school counselors came up a lot.
It's interesting how many people jumped right to, like, involving the police.
hmm
It seems like there's a lot to think about before going that route. But starting with those trusted adults, why is that so important?
I think you can think of it like building a support system, It's not just her against this problem anymore. When she tells someone, it creates a record of what's happening, which can be super important later on. And getting those responsible adults involved can help figure out if her cousin needs mental health support, you know, and how to get it for him.
So it's not just about making the messages stop, but also about getting to the root of what's going on.
Exactly. Now she's also gotten advice to confront him directly or like expose him in a family group chat.
Yeah, it seemed to be pretty popular in the comments. Is that the right way to go, though?
I mean, while it might feel good to take action right away, think about this. Direct confrontation could make things worse. It might not help with the mental health side of things, and it could really damage those family relationships.
That's a really good point. It sounds like a more thought-out approach is what's needed.
Definitely. And a lot of people were talking about self-defense and protecting herself. Has she thought about things like sharing her location with friends she trusts, learning some basic self-defense, or even personal safety devices, like pepper spray? If it's legal where she lives, of course.
It seems like those suggestions are all about her taking control of her own safety.
Exactly. It's not about living in fear, but being prepared.
Now, going back to that police thing, that sparked a lot of debate online. Some people weren't so sure if the police would be helpful here.
It's true, their response can be hard to predict. They might not have the resources or the training to deal with these kinds of cases very well. But here's the thing. Reporting it creates a formal record, which can be really important if she needs to take legal action later on, like getting a restraining order.
So even if they can't fix it right away, going to the police could help in the long run.
Exactly. It's about thinking strategically. Now, there was one suggestion that really stood out to me. Some people recommended reaching out to mental health services for her cousin. They even mentioned that 98 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
That's interesting because it's not just about protecting herself, but maybe helping her cousin too.
Right. It recognizes that this is a complicated situation and that he might be struggling.
Sounds like setting boundaries is important here. A lot of
Okay.
people were advising that. What would that look like in this specific case?
It means telling her cousin very clearly that his messages are not okay and that they're inappropriate. It might also mean having some hard conversations with her family, explaining why she needs them to back her up on those boundaries.
I can imagine that's not easy.
It's not, but remember, setting those boundaries is about putting her safety and well-being first. It's not about punishing him, it's about protecting herself.
There's also the question of, like, documenting the harassment. Several commenters suggested taking screenshots of the messages, keeping a log of everything, and maybe even recording conversations if she can.
Documentation can be powerful stuff, especially if she needs to go the legal route. It gives her solid evidence and shows a pattern of behavior.
So it's not just about feeling safe emotionally, but taking those practical steps to protect herself. Speaking of which, some people talked about her physical environment, making sure her home is secure, being aware of her surroundings when she's out even thinking about escape routes.
It's all about having a plan, knowing what to do if things escalate.
I even saw some people joking about releasing the mama bear, letting her mom handle it. While it's meant to be funny, it brings up that importance of having those supportive family members.
Absolutely. A little humor can sometimes help in a tough spot, but it's also about remembering that she has people who care about her and want to help.
It really sounds like you're saying there are a lot of layers to this whole situation. It's not just about stopping the messages, but creating a safety net for herself, and maybe even helping her cousin get the support he needs.
Exactly. And that's where that advice to involve trusted adults comes back in. They can help her figure out all those different pieces. This can be a really tough thing to deal with, especially when you're only 16. It's a lot to handle. And one thing that kept coming up in those comments was that fear of judgment.
Yeah, she mentioned feeling scared, and a lot of people online were worried that people wouldn't take her seriously or even blame her. It's awful that people would think like that, but it seems like it's a pretty common worry.
It's a very real fear. Sadly, we live in a world where people do sometimes blame the victim, and that makes it even harder to speak up.
So what can she do if she's worried about that judgment? Who can she turn to?
Well, first of all, trust your gut. Her feelings are valid, what she's going through is wrong, and she deserves to feel safe and supported. Surround yourself with people who believe her and who'll stand up for her. Those are the people she needs right now.
It sounds like finding her tribe,
Hmm.
the people she can really trust.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to reach out to a therapist or counselor. They're trained to listen without judging, and they can help her work through everything.
It's about letting herself put her mental health first.
Absolutely. Taking care of yourself emotionally is just as important as staying physically safe. Now, we need to be realistic here. Family stuff can get really complicated, especially when you add mental health into the mix.
It's like you're walking on eggshells,
Okay.
right? Trying to protect yourself, but you're also thinking about those family relationships.
I think that's a great way to put it. And remember, she's not responsible for his mental health. She can't control what he does or force him to get help.
But I can control how I react and what steps I take to keep myself safe.
Exactly. She has the power to make choices in this situation, and that's important. Sometimes that might mean making tough decisions, like distancing yourself from some family members or even getting legal protection.
Those are big decisions.
They are, and they're never easy. But sometimes they're what you need to do to stay safe and take care of yourself. It's also really important to remember that there's no one right answer here. Every situation is different, and what works for one person might not work for another.
That's a good reminder. We've talked about so many different things, and it can feel overwhelming.
It's all about finding what feels right for her. Get the information, look at the options, and make choices that feel safe and empowering. And remember, she doesn't have to go through this alone. There are resources out there, friends, family therapists, even those helplines like 988.
Asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Absolutely. It can make all the difference in a tough spot like this. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about how this is affecting her emotionally. It's easy to focus on the practical stuff, but we can't forget about that emotional side of things.
It makes sense that this would be draining,
Emotionally.
It is. And it's so important to acknowledge those feelings, the fear, the anxiety, the confusion. Don't bottle it up or try to pretend they're not there.
So what can she do to deal with all those emotions? Talking to someone she trusts, a friend, family member, or a therapist can help process those feelings and make her feel less alone. Sometimes just saying those feelings out loud can make them feel a little less overwhelming.
It's like venting to a friend.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people online were suggesting things like journaling, meditation, spending time in nature,
Yeah.
anything that helps her de-stress and recharge.
Those are all great ways to take care of yourself.
They are. Self-care is so important, especially when you're going through something stressful. And remember, she mentioned feeling like things were out of control. One commenter had a really good idea: focus on what you can control.
That's a good point. It's easy to feel powerless in a situation like this.
She can't control what her cousin does, but she can control how she reacts. She can control what boundaries she sets and what steps she takes to protect herself.
So it's about taking back that control.
Exactly. And that can make a big difference in how she feels overall.
We've covered so much ground today, from practical advice to the emotional impact of all this. It's clear that she's dealing with something really tough. What are your final thoughts for our listener as we start to wrap things up?
Remember, you are not alone. These situations are hard, but there's help out there. Reach out to those trusted adults, set those clear boundaries, document everything, and make your safety and well-being a priority.
And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help.
I love that your voice matters. Your safety matters. And you deserve to feel safe and supported.
Wow. Feels like we've really gone deep on this one. From those practical tips on how to stay safe to the emotional side of things, it's a lot.
Yeah, it really shows just how complicated this whole situation is. One thing that really hit me when I was reading those comments was how many people shared their own stories about going through something similar.
So sad to think how many people are dealing with this. But it does show that she's not alone in this. It's like a shared experience, even though it can feel really isolating right now.
Absolutely. And it really highlights how important it is to talk about these things, to break the silence and create a space where people feel safe coming forward and asking for help.
It sounds like what you're saying is speaking up can be powerful, not just for her, but for others too.
Exactly. By sharing her story and reaching out for support, she might inspire someone else to do the same.
So what would you say is like the biggest takeaway for our listener today? What's that one thing you want her to remember?
If I could just leave her with one thought, it would be this: her voice matters. Her safety matters. and she deserves to feel safe and supported. Don't be afraid to ask for help, set those boundaries, and put her well-being first.
It's been such an insightful deep dive into a really tough topic. We've covered so much talking to trusted adults, setting boundaries, documenting everything, physical safety, the emotional side of things, and the power of speaking up. If anything we've talked about has resonated with you, or if you're going through something similar, please remember those resources we talked about. Reaching out to a trusted adult, a helpline, or any of those organizations we mentioned. And remember, you're not alone. There are people who care and want to help.
That's so important.
Thank you for joining us on Voices of the Soul for this deep dive. If you found this episode helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives on these important topics. And for even more great content, check out our YouTube channel, Shauna Pelage. We'll see you next time.